Kanye West, who is famous for saying things like George Bush doesn't care about black people, for getting on stage with Taylor Swift and making a statement that Beyonce should have won and that probably racism was part of the voting. So somebody who has strong credentials for being, an advocate for African Americans and, against racism. So Kanye has good credentials from that point of view. What did he tweet? He tweeted, "I like the way Candace Owens thinks." 7 words. And he ripped a hole in reality.
Kanye West tweeted that he liked the way Candace Owens thinks after watching the following video.
What you're seeing happening today, obviously we have some black people that are just shouting in the back. We have some black people that are sitting in the front quietly that are chanting USA and having a normal conversation. I love that because what I say every single time, and you may have seen me on the news, is that what is happening right now in the black community, you're going to hear it in this room first. There's an ideological civil war happening. Black people that are focused on their past and shouting about slavery, and black people that are focused on their futures, okay? That's really what it comes down to, okay? I can guarantee you what you're seeing happening is victim mentality versus victor mentality.
That's
I promise
great, by
you,
the way.
the people here are going to win.
I love that.
And there's no doubt in my mind. I can tell you right now who is going to be better off when we look 20 years and we look at the faces in this room. Who is going to be better off are the girls that are sitting right here and across this room because they don't have your mentality. Victim mentality is not cool. I don't know why people like being oppressed. It's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. I love oppression. We're oppressed. 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, which by the way, none of you guys lived through. Your grandparents did. And it's embarrassing that you utilize their history. You utilize their history and you come in here with more emotion than they ever had when they were living through it. More emotion than they ever had when they were living through it. It's embarrassing. You're not living through anything right now. You're overly privileged Americans.
For those of you not familiar with Candace Owens, she's a young African-American conservative. But what's more interesting than her political views is how she became a conservative in the first place.
Worked at a private equity firm for 4 years. Left that firm and wanted to do my own anti-bullying startup thing that went really sideways when the left tried to do hit pieces on me during the election, and that was my red pill moment.
Really? So
yeah.
Wait, how did doing an anti-bullying thing get you caught up in the left?
So I don't know if many people that watch this show are familiar with the Gamergate scandal. I certainly wasn't.
I think most of my audience is familiar-ish, but like nobody fully gets it. I think. But feel free to take us down that road for a little bit.
Yeah, so long story short, that whole scandal is built on a girl named Zoe Quinn who says that she was attacked by anonymous white men on the internet, and people were saying that that wasn't true, and she said that it was. And
if they were anonymous, how did she know their skin color?
I don't know. If you read the pieces in the media, it's fascinating, Yeah. So I was doing an anti-bullying startup that I was really passionate about, and I got a phone call from her, and I put up basically a 3-minute video on Kickstarter teasing what we were going to do. And I said this one sentence, which was a figure of speech that I think set the alarms off. I said, what we're doing is figuratively lifting the masks up off of trolls. At the time, she was working at Twitter. She was working for Twitter for something called Crash Override Network, and I immediately received an inbox from her on Twitter saying she'd like to talk to me about and try to convince me that the project that I'm doing is bad, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So she calls me up, and I have no idea who she is. I don't know what Gamergate is. I don't know what doxing means. And she says, you have to play your project because people actually don't want to find out who harassed them. She said, I'm a victim, but I never want to know who harassed me on the internet. Like, she was basically arguing a point that didn't make sense. If she was actually harassed on the internet, then obviously my technology would be a godsend because they never figured out who harassed her. And I said, I appreciate the phone call. This isn't really making sense to me.
Yeah. It sounds literally the reverse of what you'd think she would have called you to say.
Absolutely. Okay. Like, she should have been on board with what I was doing. So totally appreciate the phone call, but I'm not going to pull my Kickstarter. And she started crying. And she said, if you don't, it's going to ruin everything. And she told me that she spends time on 4chan because of what she does, and she saw that people were already talking about my project, and if I didn't pull it, they, these anonymous white men and Trump supporters, you have to remember this was during the election cycle, were going to come after me and dox my family, which essentially means put up their personal information so people can try to kill them. That's what she says.
So she said this is what they are going to do. So she was oddly threatening you with being doxxed, but it wasn't she that was going to dox you.
She thought I was a total moron, I think, and I'm like, okay, not pulling my project. She hangs up the phone crying. Within 2 hours, we were absolutely inundated. About 4,000 emails via Kickstarter, like, nigger, 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 die, pull your project. And they have these super obvious screen names, like, Trump or die, Trump 2020, white man behind computer.
That's a good one.
So, and I'm like, is she kidding? All men, by the way. Everyone was like, Dave at, Bob at, no woman. And magically, everything that she tried to warn me about came true within a couple of hours of me refusing to pull my project. So I tweet very quickly, again, not really knowing the bread and butter of the Gamergate scandal. I said, all I can say is that 100% after speaking with Zoe Quinn, this girl was never harassed. She's doing the harassing. And the next morning I woke up, The Guardian, The Washington Post, and New York Magazine were all calling me. I was a nobody with a Kickstarter that was 3 minutes long. Kickstarter pulled my project, and the next day, big media. And in my head, I'm thinking, journalism major, Washington Post, amazing. Like, at that point, I considered myself a liberal, Democrat, if you will. And so I was like, great, I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to tell them about this girl. They're going to write the piece, about what...
Bad feeling where this is about to go.
This is about to go completely sideways.
Okay.
So I speak to a person named Jesse Singal who works for New York Magazine, and he's like, yeah, I saw your tweets.
He's not a fan of mine.
No, he is a journalist hitman, as I like to call them. And he speaks to me, he's like, yeah, I saw your tweets. I just wanted to speak to you about what happened, super nice. Yeah, and I tell him everything. I'm like, yeah, Zoe called me up, open and shut case. Obviously, she told me to pull my project. I didn't, and then I got harassed. He instead writes this article. The tone of it was essentially trying to gaslight me. Oh, she seemed like a nice girl, but she got dragged into this conspiracy theory. Zoe actually is a girl that was harassed, And at that point, I realized, oh my God, like the media is going to try to kill my project, and these journalists are absolutely lying. So the Washington Post called me, and I had the good sense to actually record it. I just turned on my camera and said, something fishy's here. And this girl was obvious. This girl, Caitlin Dewey, was asking me questions, and she was trying to figure out who was funding us. And her job, or her role, was to cut off the funding, cut off the legs of Social Autopsy so it could never see the light of day. And she started calling around, so I actually got a tip that she had already written the article and she was going to try to smear me. And I essentially went back and forth with the Washington Post. I had caught her in a lie via email versus what she said on the phone, and they pulled the article last second and told me I wasn't important enough to run it anyways when I threatened to sue them.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, wait, there's so much here, and it's so related to everything, and we haven't even fully got to the political awakening yet.
Yeah.
So first off, I love that you said they're hitmen.
Yes, journalists are hitmen.
Yeah. Because the phrase, I mentioned it to you right before we started, I've been saying that they're activists, not journalists, but they're hitmen.
Absolutely.
Is what they really are. There's so many examples of this. That guy you mentioned, it's not even worth mentioning his name again.
Yeah.
And he's attacked me on Twitter for nonsense. And it's just it's like, you guys, you're not even pretending.
No, they are hired, and the higher-ups definitely know about it. They are hired to take people out and to take businesses out that, are a threat to them for some reason. And my threat was that they actually thought that I had created technology that was going to unmask trolls. Imagine what that would have done in the heat of the election. Hillary Clinton had millions of followers on Twitter. What if I actually created something and said, actually, that's all coming from, that's like one person, they created all these accounts. She's actually not winning this election. What if I found out on Twitter that the person that was writing Black Lives Matter saying, die, 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 nigger, nigger, niggers, was actually someone that worked in Hillary's campaign to create this environment. So they were actually terrified that I created something, that was going to ruin everything.
So wait a minute. So did you actually create?
No.
Right, so that's the thing. So you didn't even create this technology.
They had actually done their job as journalists and asked me questions about what I had created.
Yeah.
They would have left me alone.
But, all right, and then Kickstarter pulled it?
They pulled it, didn't give me a reason. They just pulled the project off. An anti-bullying, and could you do anything that's more innocent and more PG? An anti-bullying, hey, we're raising money. Want to try out this, anti-bullying tech startup type thing, and nothing but a splash page at that point.
Yeah, all right. So, it's funny because hearing this, it all sounds incredible, and yet I've personally been part of some of the stuff. I've obviously sat across from people from Brett Weinstein and Colin Moriarty, people that have been through this monster.
Right.
This dishonest media, the craziness online, all of this stuff. So, okay, so this is all happening to you. When did you start piecing it together?
Instantly. The second the Washington Post called me and Caitlin Dewey was trying to cut off the lens of the funding, I realized what I had to go back and watch the Kickstarter and say, what did I say that set this off? And I realized it was that one line. They thought that I actually, and then her saying, you're going to ruin everything. I pieced it all together instantly, and I realized that my friends were my enemies, and my enemies were my friends, and the only people that covered the story extensively and accurately were the white nationalist Breitbart.
Candace Owens' political awakening came through first-hand experience in how institutionalized power is used in the United States of America against African Americans. It is not in the way that the mainstream media projects. Rather, the media, progressive academia, Hollywood, and popular culture, along with left-wing politicians, convince African Americans that hordes of racist, angry white people hold institutional power. And the only answer to the problem is to vote for bigger government. The same bigger government that makes the country worse not only for African Americans, not only holds African Americans back, but holds white people, Spanish, all Americans back by taking away our liberty and transferring power to the corrupt, the government. We've seen this institutionalized power used again and again, and recently we also saw it used against Diamond and Silk.
So we're going to talk to you guys about Facebook now. You're basically famous. They're name-dropping you in the Senate hearings with Zuckerberg and everything. And I've seen some of the posts on your Facebook page. You guys put up a video and you have so many followers and it's not getting any traction. Do you believe that you guys have been persecuted by Facebook?
I believe that conservative voices like ourselves has been censored. We do believe that. And we put up a post just yesterday. And the post has been up for hours, but it only reached 6 people out of 1.5 million people. And we want to bring this awareness to Facebook because we want these algorithms off of our pages, not only our page, but all conservative platform
pages. And that's
pages.
a form of censorship that's going on. When people can't like and follow your page, they can't comment on your page. Not all people, but some people. The deal is we're being suppressed and we're being censored. And if this platform is supposed to be for all ideas, then algorithms should not be put in place to censor some ideas.
That's right.
And the Facebook people are claiming that they've tried to reach out to you via phone calls and Twitter and Facebook messaging, and they're commenting on your Facebook page. Have you guys seen any of that outreach or not?
Let me just tell you what we saw. We woke up the other day and we saw something in Twitter where they said to us, Facebook, verified Facebook page, said they've been trying to contact us for us to get into contact with them, and that's what we did. But we also noticed somebody named Eric Erickson that put something out in the media. He's such a liar. That said that Facebook talked to us and emailed us before we went on Fox News, and that is a lie. Facebook sent us an email on April the 5th deeming us as unsafe to the community. We put that out on April the 6th, which was that Friday, about what they had did. We was on Fox and Friends on that Sunday.
That's right.
Facebook have not contacted us. We was on Fox and Friends on that Monday. They asked.
That's
Facebook was like, well, they're trying to determine who's the creator.
That's
they
right.
hadn't contacted us.
Why is it that the mainstream media, social networks, popular culture, the late night talk shows attack black people who think differently harder than anyone else? What are they so afraid of? Could it be Kanye West? I love the way Candace Owens thinks. The blinders are off. Be fearless. Express what you feel, not what you've been programmed to think. Self-victimization is a disease. People demonize people, and then they demonize anybody who sees anything positive in someone who's been demonized. We have freedom of speech, but not freedom of thought. There was a time when slavery was a trend, and apparently that time is still upon us, but now it's a mentality. And then Kanye West tweeted out a video posted by Scott Adams.
So, we humans have developed a number of prisons of the mind. Things that we just imagine to be our limitations or imagine to be true, and it limits what we think is possible and it limits what choices we make. Here are two of the biggest ones. I talk about this a lot. One is the false belief that history repeats. It doesn't. It never does. It just looks like it because we have this pattern recognition brain. So anytime we see anything that reminds us of another thing, we say, well, there it is, history repeating again. But that's not what's happening. History can't repeat because all the variables are changing all the time. So you can't ever have the same starting point you ever had in history. History never repeats, ever. If you think it does, you're in a mental prison. If you think it doesn't, do you know what happens if you think that history doesn't repeat? Then you can become president of the United States without ever being a politician. If you believe that history repeats, you don't even try. President Trump is not in a mental prison. Did he think that North Korea was unsolvable? Nope. Did he think he couldn't negotiate trade deals? Nope, he didn't think that. Did he think he couldn't give people nicknames and win an election that way? With other stuff, of course. Nope. Did he think he could, that nobody could talk about immigration without being labeled a racist and therefore, their life was over? Didn't seem to bother him. He consistently shows you that history doesn't repeat. Where do you get that? Well, probably it traces back to the same place I got it. The power of positive thinking. Remember, his pastor when he was a kid was Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. The power of positive thinking is very close to this. It's very close to thinking to the belief that you're not in a mental prison. History doesn't define you. You can get out of that little mental prison. Here's another one that I like to look at. This is another mental prison. All right, that the problem has to be the solution. Now, this will require some explaining. All right, but it's a mental trap. It's a prison if you think that the only solutions are things that are closely related to the problem. I'll show you how that works in a real-world situation. First, some context. When slavery was the problem, you could say that, white people were essentially the problem for slavery, right? And it required white people to do something massively different for slavery to go away. So in this case, the problem and the solution were very similar. It was white people. White people were the problem. White people had to change. Then move fast forward to the civil rights era. Again, even though everybody was involved in the civil rights, right? All the every group and gender and everybody was involved in that. But the people who had to change the most, the people who had to pass laws, etc., were white people. So white people were kind of the problem, and white people were kind of the solution too. All right, but when you get to what I would call the last mile, there's what I call the last mile fog. In these earlier situations, it was very clear what had to be done. All right, you have to get rid of slavery. You have to change some laws. You have to prosecute some people who violate the laws. So it was fairly clear what to do, what the problem was, etc. But now you get to this last mile, where things are way better, but still lots of things could be far better than they are. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by the fog. The fog is where people don't even quite agree what the problem is. All right. So I think it was Sean King was tweeting around yesterday, some statistics showing that, I hope I have this right, an unarmed black man has something like 4 times more chance of being shot by police in a inappropriate shooting, whatever name they put on that. But an unarmed, remember, nobody has a gun in any of these examples, but an unarmed black man has a 4 times greater chance of being shot by police. Now, I lingered on that a little bit because I know many of you are throwing up in your mouths right now because you disagree with that being true. So you actually disagree on whether the statistic is correct. Now, I don't know if it's correct or not, but I know that a lot of you are saying something like this, all right? Some version of this you're probably thinking. The people watching this Periscope, you're thinking to yourself, but wait a minute. Wouldn't it be true that the greatest number of unarmed people in general are going to be shot wherever there's the highest crime? So wouldn't you expect that if you're in a high crime neighborhood, unarmed people who are innocent are going to be shot at a far greater rate? So wouldn't the poverty rate really be the main variable here? And unfortunately, if more black people are in bad neighborhoods, they're in high crime neighborhoods, of course, more innocent people of all types are going to be harmed for all reasons. Now, does that explain away Sean King's statistic? I have no idea. But nobody else does either. I've never seen that debated, have you? I've never seen an article where somebody gave that statistic and then also gave the other side and said, well, but have they controlled for this variable? Maybe they have. I don't know. But you don't know either. So that's my point. There's this fog about this last mile, and, what do you do about it? So we're coming to a point that I think will define the golden age, at least in some ways. Let's see if you can, does that help you see this better? In which we're separating the problem from the solution. And what I mean by that is sort of the philosophy you're seeing from Candace Owens, and you can Google her if you're not familiar with her. She's a conservative African-American woman who's become a very important voice because she represents a point of view that you don't see as much as you probably will in the future. Now, what's interesting is that, and what I mean by separating the problem from the solution, is that the conservative view, which Candace holds, is that society has done what it can do, meaning that white people have done what they can do to make the laws, as close as possible, to enforce the laws, etc., and that the last mile, no matter whose problem it is, no matter who causes the problem, this is what's different. It doesn't matter if white people are or are not the cause of the last mile problem. They can't fix it. They can do what they can do, but they're not really the solution. So Candace's, I would say, realization is that the problem and the solution are disconnected. And if you're still locked in the past, thinking that white people have to do something, much different, you're going to be missing your opportunities. That you're thinking about it wrong, and therefore your solutions will be suboptimal. Now, let me say, I'm doing the best I can to represent someone else's opinion, just so I can tell the full story. I apologize in advance for summarizing it and maybe to the point of being slightly inaccurate. I hope I'm not doing that. But the basic idea is that the conservative view that Candace seems to be a good voice for is that only the people who have the problem can fix it. It's not the people that did cause it or you think caused it. It doesn't matter because they can't fix it. They're helpless to fix it. They would if they could. Probably would. Just can't. Don't have all the tools. Now, there are things that can be done with funding and laws, etc. So there are lots of things that can and should be done. But the conservative view is that the big gains are how the people think about the problem themselves. In other words, Candace is saying that we're in the golden age already, and that the biggest problem here is the way we think about the problem. Because if we think about it differently, we can get to a better place. What was the big news of the week? Kanye West who is famous for saying things like George Bush doesn't care about black people, for getting on stage with Taylor Swift and making a statement that Beyonce should have won and that probably racism was part of the voting. So somebody who has strong credentials for being, an advocate for African Americans and, against racism. So Kanye has good credentials from that point of view. What did he tweet? He tweeted, "I like the way Candace Owens thinks." 7 words. And he ripped a hole in reality with 7 words. Because Kanye is supposed to be over here. And Candace is supposed to be over here. And they're not ever supposed to say the other one said something right. All right? That's not supposed to happen. But Kanye did it anyway. Kanye knows history doesn't repeat. He's not a prisoner of the mind. He knows that the problem is not the solution. Whatever you want to say about Kanye's politics, and I don't even know what his preferred politics would be. I'm not even sure what party he would run for it if he ran for president at this point. Whatever else you want to say about him, and I don't know enough about his actual, management skills or political ability, but he did something that you could rarely see. He actually just altered reality. He just made the entire conservative Twitter sphere just go something like this. It's like your head just went, what did I just see? Did I really see this? Now forget about which of these views you like the best. That's not even the story. Forget about whether you think Candace has everything right or everything wrong. That's not the story. The story is that these two people that shouldn't be in the same conversation, in 7 words, Kanye just changed that. And he just freed a lot of people from a mental prison. Kanye, in 7 words, unlocked a mental prison and is bringing you to the golden age.
It doesn't matter if you agree with Kanye West or not. What is important is that Kanye West is attempting to show people that it's okay to think freely. That the world is not as it's projected in popular culture by the mainstream media, by the universities. If you don't believe me, do some research into Operation Mockingbird. Ask yourself why popular music seems to promote gangs, violence, drugs, and sex, as if there's not artists with more depth to them. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you support this message, you want to support me financially, go to www.patreon.com/FFRnews. I'm Tom Anderson on Steemit, Tom Anderson on Gab, TomFFRnews on Twitter, TomFFRnews on Minds, Tom Anderson on Facebook, FFRnews on Facebook. Take care.